We have an exciting show planned for you today. We have an author with us, and she has written a fascinating book about coyotes. Yes, coyotes. And in it, she explores the myths and truths about these fascinating animals. Please welcome Carol Cartaino to our show. Welcome, Carol. We're so glad to have you with us.
I'm glad to be here.
Well, Carol has an extensive background in books. You have been in publishing, you have been a professional book editor, writer's collaborator. I am so impressed with these credentials, Carol.
Well, mostly I don't write books, but once in a while I do, and most of the time I help other people make their books better or help them get them published. But this was a subject that interested me a lot, so I decided to write one.
And one author in particular, Dan Ashlet, has been very successful. I know of his books.
Oh,
it's a lot of cleaning supply,
yes, yes.
Cleaning,
yes,
organization.
I'm one of the few editors, right? I'm the head pack rat. I've worked on 6 books on dejunking, and I have outbuildings full of junk to prove it.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, I'm one of the very few editors who knows more about cleaning than I even want to admit to.
Mm-hmm. And his books have sold over 3 million copies, and she has helped him. So that's impressive right there. So Carol, your love of animals goes way back to your childhood, really.
Yes.
Because that was when it all began.
I was with my mother when I was about 10 or 12, and we were in a store, and they had some gerbils in a tank, and Mother looked at them and said, "How did we miss those?" Well, they didn't have gerbils when I was that young, but we had everything else in quantity. You know, you name it, mice, rabbits, everything. I lived in New Jersey, which is a wonderful place to be from, no offense to my home state. But I lived for the time I spent in western Pennsylvania in my grandparents' farm and in the woods of New Jersey, which were very beautiful before they were covered by houses.
Right. Right. It's so much of our county has
Yes.
changed so much, Carol, that you couldn't believe it 30 years ago.
No, I can believe it because I saw them.
You lived it.
I lived it, and I never got over it. Probably the reason I live on a small farm today is because I wanted to own enough land around me that the bulldozers would have to stop at a certain point.
Right. Right. They couldn't get to you. Okay. So, Carol, let me ask you this. With your credentials, with this extensive background in books, authoring, helping collaborate books, editing, being an editor, yet you give so many kudos to people in your acknowledgments, and especially your brother Richard.
Yes.
And you thank him for
Yes,
his...
well, that's because, I mean, some people, I have to admit, laughed at me because I insisted on including my brother in the authors, even though he's not on the title page. And even when he wanted to brag that his favorite job was driving a commuter bus from New Jersey into New York. Now,
yes.
I have to admit that's a job I wouldn't do in 1,000 years. You couldn't pay me enough to do that, but he loved it. But he was a great help. He's retired, and he was kind enough to come up here and help me do internet research, help me set things up, help me look for photographs. We wanted to include a lot of photographs in the book.
Yes.
Because people like pictures. And
Pictures bring the book to life.
Yes, and I had worked on many, many books that had a lot of photographs in my life, so I knew the difference between a good picture and a lousy picture and a freebie, ugly picture. And so I had to find ones that hadn't been used every place in creation, that cost something but not too much. That takes a lot of sweet talking to photographers too, but the people were nice enough that I have 40, I think, really nice looking pictures, thanks to them.
That's it, and we're going to show you some of those. So, Carol, and then you also thank him for all his support. Now, someone with your credentials, I would just think that you really didn't need any support. How important is that?
Anybody who's ever done a book, and I have worked with many authors, I've got to the point where I don't want to say how many years I've worked on books, because, it sounded good maybe at 20 or 30, but when you say more than 40,
when you start going,
you feel like you should be operating out of the nursing home.
I see.
But, in fact, I have worked on books for 40 years, and that's a great variety of personalities, subjects, and I've loved every minute of it. But the one thing I know for sure is that no matter what kind of book you're doing, fiction or nonfiction, it's a lot more work than anybody realizes. So everybody needs help.
Even you.
Yes.
Even you. Well, she's written Excellent book. This book you will want just for its information. It is entertaining and it's factual. So everyone that has ever thought about coyotes will want this. And you'll just put it up on the shelf, and when you have a question, you can go to it. Okay, Carol, I love the layout. She's got it. Of course, we have our table of contents, and then she has her chapters, and then she has those subtitled. So even if you're in the chapter, then you can go right to that part you're looking for. So I love the layout of the book. It is a professional job, and I have never thought about coyotes, and I can't tell you how much I enjoyed it. But they are here, they're with us, and as Carol points out, these little characters are now in
every state in the country except Hawaii, because it's too far for them to swim, but I feel certain, given their other talents, they're going to find out a way to get there.
Mm-hmm.
They were originally, you remember the old days when we only knew this as a cartoon character, right?
Yes.
Wiley and the...
Yes.
And the Roadrunner, and then there was a Western story, and there was a little coyote howling in the background. Well, it's a big difference. Now you see them in the headlines. It's because they're in every state except Hawaii.
Mm-hmm.
And people, I called up the state of Ohio. I went to a lecture. I gave a lecture on the subject, and someone said, well, how many coyotes are in Ohio? And I didn't know the answer to that, even though I'd done a lot of work. So I ran back home and looked in my folder. It didn't say. So I called the ODNR, the Department of Natural Resources in Ohio, and I said, how many coyotes in Ohio anyway? And they said, we don't know because we don't count them. But we can tell you they're in every county, every city, every suburb, and every town in Ohio. And I feel certain that if you called the Kentucky Department of Natural Resources, you would probably get the same answer.
Around that same answer.
I did some research on this today, and they're certainly in every county.
Mm-hmm.
But the part that's surprising to many people is they aren't just in the country anymore. They're in the city and the suburbs.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where a lot of the apprehension comes in, because we're kind of used to having, opossums and raccoons and starlings in the suburbs and squirrels, but an animal, this is a small one, okay, not
it's
fully
beautiful.
grown, 2 feet high at the shoulder with big sharp teeth. Living right amongst us is another story, and it has raised a lot of questions in people's minds, which I went to great effort. I mean, that's really why I did the book. People have asked me, well, why did you decide to write about that? It's true, I love nature, but the fact is, just like many of the readers of the book and people out there watching this, I had questions. I was working in my office. I have a pole barn. Most people probably know what that is, but it's not known for its sound insulation, and I'm typing away. This is in the 80s, and I hear these strange sounds, and I thought, well, I wonder what that is. Sounds like some neighbor has a bunch of rambunctious little pups or something. And I didn't think much about it, but I heard it, a lot of other nights. And then one time, being a nature nut, I had a videotape, an audio tape of sounds. I was listening for some other weird sound I'd heard, and we got to the mammals, and I thought, oh my God, it's coyotes. It's an interesting thing about coyotes. How many animals can you think of that most people have heard more than they've ever seen? And that's the case with coyotes.
That is the case. That is, people here have questions. When I knew I was doing the show, when they knew I was doing the show, Carol, they hear them, but they never see them.
Right.
And of course, that is another mysterious thing about these creatures. Many times you do hear them, but you don't see them.
Right, and that, as I said, so then, like many people in the audience, I thought, well, okay, so those are coyotes. Well, is this something I need to worry about or not? And my veterinarian said to me once, when you have a lot of pets, you spend a lot of time with your veterinarian, in his office. And he said, he turned to one of the other clients in the office one day and he said, well, one way to deal with your fears is to research them. And now here's a perfect example.
That's true. That's true.
So I decided to learn the truth, and it was very educational.
Okay, now you only touched on the coyote and the Native American legends. You said that's a whole book in itself.
Right, and there are many.
Did the Native Americans revere them? Were they frightened of them?
I think
What's the general consensus?
The general thing was they were to some, you know, depending on the tribe and so on. I'm not the last word on this subject, but I did read a fair amount on it. They were thought of as godlike creatures in some cultures, but in many, the more typical, Coyote was the trickster. I have this charming book that I bought of Navajo tales about coyotes, and the coyote is always, he's smart, but he always ends up outsmarting himself, and there's some funny story about how in the end he ends up in trouble because he was too sneaky. You know, that's another interesting thing, word sneaky makes me thinking about coyotes, is that they're one of the most intelligent animals. That's one of the reasons we have such trouble dealing with them when we try to control them. And yet, you notice when people talk about them, and this tells you a lot about our attitude toward them, we don't say coyotes are intelligent. We say coyotes are wily, which sounds like, well, sneaky, right? I mean, it's not exactly intelligent. And that, I mean, a lot of the adjectives applied to coyotes, skulking, it's, well, because they are very elusive. They're smart enough to know, for the most part, and there are exceptions to this, that the more out of our sight they stay, the better off they are.
That's just how sharp they are.
Yeah.
Okay, Carol, you tried to stay objective. And this animal also, there's usually people that love them, or there are people that hate them. The only good coyote is a dead coyote. Carol has tried to stay neutral in the book. She's given us the pros and the cons.
No, this was very important.
And I love that part about, this book.
Important to me because I don't pretend to be a scientist. Yeah, okay, I was a biology minor, but you know, that's just nothing. It was very important to me to do a book that scientists would not find fault with and that told the truth. So I went to great effort.
You can tell.
I researched, I read every book. I have a wonderful, an entire coyote library. I read every book ever done. I think I did 10,000 copies on my copier of pages from books. I looked at every internet site just about. I did interviews, and when I approach a subject, including this one, the only way to do that is you write down what everybody says, and if 4 guys say this and 5 guys say that, well, then you have to find out more, because what is the answer?
Because that's not enough.
Right.
Okay, now, Carol, a coyote stands on its own. It is its own species. This is not a part dog and part wolf. I mean,
no, they are
this
their
is
own.
a coyote as a fox is a fox, as a wolf is a wolf. Because so many people think that this is some kind of mixture, and it is not.
No, it's coyotes.
It is a breed.
Are a completely American animal. They don't exist anywhere else.
I wondered about that.
No.
This is native
Even though there are some animals that resemble them fairly closely. I think there's something in Africa called the black-backed jackal that looks a lot like a coyote, but the only place coyotes exist is in North America. I mean, the United States, Canada, and South Central America. And they were evolved here, and they've been around for a long time, but they were not everybody's neighbors always, only now.
Right. Only now have they spread. They're just, you might see one anywhere and everywhere. Okay, Carol has some amazing, now we're seeing him behind us. He's a rather tan coyote. They're also common gray.
Yes, they're very variable in their coloration, although there's always a certain, from the same number palette, I call it in the book, of colors. There's gray, tan, black, white, and reddish brown, and there's always some mixture of that, but it depends on where they are. In the desert, they're lighter than this. The ones that live in darker forest areas are darker. And there's eastern coyotes and western coyotes.
Let me show a picture of that now, of those right now, Carol. And do tell us, there's a difference.
Yes, and the difference is a big one, actually. The western coyotes, which, the original coyotes were out in the grassy areas of the United States in the midsection. That's where they originated before they spread all over. Well, when they were taking over the country, it's the only way you can put it, which they did all by themselves, I want to make it clear. They migrated, first west, then north to Alaska, then they went up into the upper Midwest, upper Great Lakes region in Canada, and then they headed for New England, and somewhere along the line there, The first coyotes met the last wolves in the area because the wolves had been pretty much exterminated in most places, and they had a little love affair. And it's unusual for two species to cross and for the cross to be fertile. But the cross, which was the eastern coyote, which began appearing then in New England, and nobody knew what it was. It was sort of like a coyote, but bigger, and had bigger jaw. It was sort of stockier.
Wider
face, a little heavier. I think the biggest eastern coyotes can go like 60 pounds, which in our area, the typical weight for a coyote, the males weigh more than the females, or it's more like 35, okay?
Okay, how I see it is the eastern coyote looks more like the German Shepherd. The face is wider. This coyote, our western coyote, looks more like a wild animal.
Yes, and I have to admit,
to
having looked at a kabillion pictures of coyotes in between reading all my coyote library and looking for pictures, that I personally prefer the western ones because I like foxes, and they look more like foxes.
Absolutely, they look like a real wild. Okay, so we want to show you a picture that Carol has provided in the book, and there are many others. We can't get to everything. We couldn't possibly get to everything in the book. But let me just show you a coyote that's not in a good mood. And this will show you why you would want, and look, just check out the teeth.
Yes, I put that in there because I had seen many pictures of utterly charming coyotes, and there is another side to them, and I wanted to include one picture.
I mean, he's still beautiful, but just look at the teeth. And so you can imagine, and these animals eat meat as well as vegetables. So
someone asked me in the course of my research what was the most surprising thing I learned, and there were the two most surprising things were that
give us those.
Coyotes could run 40 miles an hour, which sort of horrified me. Well, I was thinking, well, how much faster than a cat is that? Pardon me. And the fact that they ate such an incredible variety of things. I had to take 2 entire pages of the book just to list the categories of things they ate. And this is a big secret of their success.
Sure.
Because wolves, if they run out of elk, they're in trouble, okay? Whereas coyotes, if they get done, they have teeth that can eat both vegetation and meat. And the list of things that they eat would stun you. I mean, everything from one of the most common things they eat is rodents, which we can all be grateful for. Rats and mice.
Yes.
Squirrels, gophers, prairie dogs, chipmunks, the whole deal. Rabbits, a great number of rabbits of all kinds. Then big varmints, groundhogs, raccoons, opossums, and skunks. Muskrats, beavers, otters, armadillos, weasels, javelinas. Deer, they increasingly eat deer, including fawns. Birds of all kinds, especially ground nesting. But then, okay, we sort of expected that, but then it goes on. Salamanders, frogs, lizards, snakes, snails, turtles, crayfish.
And this, of course, is why they are able to sustain this species.
They even eat bugs.
Absolutely. A very interesting thing about them is that when their population goes down, automatically there are more pups produced.
Right.
Now that has to be nature at its finest.
Right, and it goes the other way too. If there's too many, they have less. That's
wonderful.
Pretty impressive.
Pretty
we could
amazing.
Probably use some of that.
Okay, so I don't think you would recommend one for a pet, but you can see how people, if they came upon a den and that mother wasn't around, hopefully she wouldn't be around, you could see why someone would want them. Look at those darling
aren't they sweet?
Coyote babies. But these babies will grow up.
Yes, but they are. There's no doubt that coyote pups are right up there with the cutest
most
thing,
darling.
the cutest thing you've ever seen. Some people have kept them as pets, but they're not very satisfactory. For one thing, they are wild animals. They're not well suited, unlike some wild animals that are probably more malleable, but not coyotes. They're nervous. They're usually one-person animals. And there was a very charming book written about a woman that adopted a baby coyote and raised it, and she was a professional photographer and did all kinds of lovely photographs.
You read about, yes, right? I did. You read about her.
But even she, who loved her coyote more than anything, had eventually defend herself with deer antlers when she came in the house when he got to a certain age, because it's a wild animal. And if you're determined to have a pet, I mean, there's so many safer and easier things.
To try to deal with. Okay, I want Carol to talk about, here's a beautiful, all of them are beautiful. I mean, honestly, they are. But here is a coyote in action. He's running, and Carol, tell us their tail will always be what?
Oh yes, this is an important thing. It's true that more people have heard them than have seen them, but many people have seen one and didn't realize it, thought it was a dog. This happens a lot in suburbs and cities. And one way you can tell them from dogs is their tail will never, ever be up, okay? It's usually down like this one. Mm-hmm. I think wolves may carry their tail out straight, but coyotes down is
always
the answer.
Down.
If you have any doubt about that it's a coyote. Also, the ears
will always be up.
Always be up. They're big ears, they're pointed, and they're always up, never down. Also, if you look at the body, it's really rather slender, even though they're very hairy, and they can look, especially in the winter, very fluffy. The body, look, the legs are thin, the nose is thin, the body is really thin. They're not stocky, okay? Beautiful. And that's another way. Also, this grizzled hair, mm-hmm. which is a combination of colors, usually in these darker black, what they call guard hairs. This is one reason they are most frequently mistaken for German Shepherds, mm-hmm. because of that hair pattern. Mm-hmm. And their general size range. They look like a small German Shepherd.
And so the Eastern, would we have Eastern coyotes
Yes, that's
here?
what I've been told.
Okay, so this would look even more like a shepherd because of the wider face.
Right.
This looks more like our wild animals we talked about. Carol, we're almost running out of time. Is there anything that you would like for us to know?
Yes, I would like to say that as delightful a wild animal as they are, if you have cats or small dogs, read the chapter on this in the library. You want to, and if coyotes have been sighted in your area, you want to take measures to protect your animals, because there's absolutely no doubt that they will kill cats and small dogs given the opportunity, and you need to take measures to protect them if you have concerns. Mm-hmm. And you can get the book at the library and read that chapter. It will tell you all the details of that, but you absolutely need to do it.
Yes. Okay. Excellent advice. Well, Carol, thank you for writing this
fascinating
book. It can be a reference for all of us. It's interesting, entertaining. You must have it. It's just a great reference to have. And then if you have any questions, there it is right in your library. So again, we've been talking to Carol Cartaino. She is the author of a wonderful book, Myths and Truths About Coyotes. Her information will follow. As always, I hope you enjoyed her as much as I did. Until next time, be happy and keep smiling. I'll see you soon.